It is funny that we would have these issues. Just FYI, guys, a few minutes ago, out of the blue, our whole house internet went down. So we're operating on hotspots on our cell phones to make everything happen. And I guess the moral of that message is there's always a way. And so I'm glad that we can do it, but it's interesting that we had this issue because of the subject we're going to discuss today. I think is relevant. It's very, very relevant. And so what I wanted to do first is let you know that we are going to be in Acts 23, and we're going to read 1 through 17. I will warn you in advance that 16 and 17 are really the beginning of something else that we'll just kind of hit on, and I don't want to take that from the teacher next week. So I'll bring it up, but I will just know that there will be more to that than we will have time to cover today. I'm going to change my view just a little bit because it's throwing me off that you guys are so small. Okay, there we go. So it's a setup is what I've entitled this. And you've heard this a million times. And I'm here to tell you that it's the same setup. You know, one of the things that I find intriguing about reading God's word is understanding that there's some repetition involved in studying his word because we are creatures who need repetition. We need to do things several times in order to get it. Sometimes we need to hear it. Sometimes we need to see it. Sometimes we need to experience it. And sometimes we need to do all three and do them multiple times, unfortunately. But this is one that is pretty interesting. So we're going to start. If somebody could just tell me, because we were enjoying the sun, can you just tell me kind of what you guys talked about last week? And heads up, I didn't hear it, so I really need your help today.
James, I wasn't here last week, so I can't help.
Gotcha. Anybody who was here? Uh-oh. This might get scary. Well, okay. We'll make it work. It looks like to me that we have encountered Paul being taken into captivity. Okay. And it appears that he is in a non-Roman court.
Oh, yeah. Brother James.
Yes.
Yeah, I think, okay, I remember now. We were talking about the story where Paul was on a mission and then he had a dream. And I think Jesus was telling him to move. I think we were kind of talking about sometimes questioning what God is telling us to do, things of that nature.
Oh boy, because that's really, I'm glad you brought that up, because whenever we get a vision, right, about something to do, then something has to happen. So it was funny. Christy and I was while we were on vacation. We were talking about some stuff, and we were talking about wanting to be able to discern and do some other things more. And then we stopped. So whoa, wait a minute, God, let us clarify that. We don't necessarily need any more negative experiences. We just need to be able to use the ones we've already had, and because our thought process was that when you ask for something, like when you ask for patience, then you have to be in a place where patience is required, right? And so it's very difficult. You got to be very, very careful when you ask for something that requires you change or you get something, because that means you got to go through something to exhibit that you've learned it. And so we had to be really, really careful with that. And so here we have this thing where Paul's gotten a vision, been told to do something, and now he's got to go do it, right? And there has to be some reasons why we're asked to do those things. And one of the things I would say right here for everybody is sometimes we get caught up in thinking the devil is kicking our rear ends, when actually it's God giving us the things we need to do to be successful in this next phase. So some of the stuff that we go through is ordained. It's preordained that we need that in order to become all that we've been called to be, right? And so understand that as Paul moves, he's moving because God told him to move. It may not be what he wants to do, but it's what God has told him to do. And so, and it moved. And so it's important for us to kind of understand that. And so I want to kind of revisit some things about what we think we know, right? At this stage in the game, what do we think we know, okay? One, at this stage of the game, Paul is a prisoner, okay? And so that leads me to a couple of questions. Is God with Paul if he's a prisoner? Is it, how can God be with you? Yeah, he's in jail, about to be killed. So my question to you guys, is God with Paul? What do you think?
Yes, he's definitely with Paul.
Absolutely. Right.
Yeah, I think he is too.
So he's with Paul, huh?
So just because you're in a place of captivity does not mean that God is not with you, because sometimes you are called to be in captivity in order to get what it is that God is either trying to get to you or through you.
And just like in life, we can go through certain trials and things, and I think you were even alluding to that a bit earlier, but that doesn't mean God is not with us. He is often trying to do something in us through that trial.
Huh. So earlier, a couple chapters back, there was a big discussion about Paul going to Jerusalem. In fact, there was a fight about Paul going to Jerusalem. Does everybody remember that?
Okay.
Where his friends are like,
Oh yeah.
you can't go to Jerusalem.
Mm-hmm.
And why didn't they want him to go to Jerusalem?
Well, he'd be taken out.
They thought he would be taken out, that Jerusalem would be his end. I want you to keep remembering that as we go through this, okay? So should Paul have gone to Jerusalem now that he's in Jerusalem and in jail or a prisoner? What do you think?
That was his assignment.
Mm.
So he had to go. I mean, if he were being obedient, he had to go.
Ooh. So wait a minute. I think I'm hearing you say that there are assignments that you can get or be given that don't look good to you, but if you know it's an assignment, you still have to do it?
Yes.
Ooh, okay. Let's see. Let's go on through this a little bit. We also know that Paul is now forced to defend himself, right? He's in a place where he's been captured and he has to defend himself. Now, if you think back a little bit and you look at the persecution of Jesus, he goes through all of this as well, right? He's a prisoner. He's going someplace that he knew he kind of knew what the end was going to be. He knew. And he went anyway, despite everybody going, I don't think you should go there. And so then he gets captured, and now he's at this place where he's having to defend himself. So I think we know that Paul has to defend himself, or he defends himself. Now, Jesus doesn't really defend himself that way. He doesn't even, why do I owe you an answer to this? He kind of deals with it a different way. But Paul defends himself, and then he has to appear before several different rulers, right? And what I'm doing is I'm trying to give you the outcome of this is not a surprise, right? We all know the ending. And so what I'm doing is outlining kind of what he is going to do at this point. And at some point, he's going to have to appear before several rulers. And then the other thing I want you to know in this is not a quick process. This whole process takes about 2 years, okay, before he actually gets to the city of Rome. So I'm spoiling the end by telling you that Paul, who's now in Jerusalem, is going to get to Rome, right? I'm not really spoiling the end because we know this already, and again, we'll look at this in just a little bit. But here's kind of the process, or the things that we think we know about this process that Paul is going through, okay? So now we go to Acts 23, and we start with 1 through 3. And I'll read some of these, and I'll ask you guys to read some of these in just a little bit. But it says in 23, 1 through 3, it says, "Then Paul, looking earnestly at the council, said, 'Men and brethren, I have lived in all good conscience before,'" let me move this because it is really in my way, "'before God until this day.' And the high priest Ananias commanded those who stood by him to strike him on the mouth. Then Paul said to him, 'God will strike you, you whitewashed wall, for you sit to judge me according to the law. And do you command me to be struck contrary to the law?'" Ooh, this gets real good to me. Let me get this up here because it is right in my, there we go. And so this really starts to get good to me. So let's just take this a little bit verse by verse, starting with 1, and it says, "Then Paul, looking earnestly at the council." So what council do you think he's sitting in front of?
So the Sanhedrin Council.
The Sanhedrin Council, which is composed of, does anybody remember what it's composed of?
Watsika, we just talked about this one. See if you remember.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question. I was trying to get my son to bring my Bible upstairs. I didn't hear the question.
Who's in the Sanhedrin Council?
We did?
Mm-hmm. That's it.
Girl, I forgot. Hey, oh my God. Where's the priest? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, the Sadducees.
I know that's where the count. Was it Saturday? I mean I don't know.
Yeah, the Sadducees and the Pharisees.
Pharisees. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
That's all right. No, I'm cool. Serious, I'm fine. Go ahead. I'm fine.
It was in fact the Pharisees and the Sadducees. There's more to that council than just that, but just know that that's a majority of them. It actually also had 10 what they call judges on it, so there were 30 and 30. So when you read the Bible, there was 40 and 30, but 10 of those 30 on the 40 side were judges. So and they represented a lot of different factions within the community. It was, I guess today we would say it was kind of like a, I don't know if you guys remember having like the community watch force that would walk around the neighborhood, and I right now it would kind of be unfortunately called a HOA, right? The people who walk around the neighborhood, staring at your house, looking at your yard, making sure you're following the rules and you're doing everything you're supposed to be doing within the neighborhood. And you know, if you're too loud, or your house is junky, or your grass doesn't get cut, or it's not painted, or you got too many cars, they kind of the people who check on everything and just hold you accountable to the rules of the community that you live in. To some degrees, that's what the Sanhedrin court was, because it really had no power in terms of punishment, because the government was actually the Roman government. The Sanhedrin Council was a group of people who would influence the Romans in terms of their punishment. But the bottom line was, if you didn't break a Roman law, you rarely got punished by the Romans, right? Which is what everybody was afraid of, because the Romans, according to history, had no mercy. They were merciless people, and so that's who they were. So that's the council. And then he says something that it just strikes me really odd, because he says, "I have lived in all good conscience before God until this day." But isn't this the same Paul who persecuted Christians? Isn't this the same Paul who murdered? I mean, let's get it right. He by law he killed, but for practical purposes he murdered Christians in the name of the law. He did that, and he said, "But I've been in all good conscience before God until this day." Interesting, because you got to remember that prior to that, his thought process was that was his calling to persecute them, right? So he did it very well. And then when he made the change, he's saying, look, I've been all over. I've done everything. And until this very moment, I have always had a good conscience about what God has called me to do. Now, that doesn't mean he didn't make a lot of mistakes, because he did. We know he preached to the wrong people. We know he was out of sync with the people he was preaching to. We know he went to some places that early he should not have gone, that he had to be saved from. And that's going to be interesting. We're going to kind of hit on that a little bit here in just a little bit. But so we know that that's kind of what he's done. And then he says in 2, and the high priest Ananias commanded those who stood to tell him to be quiet. Strike him in the mouth. Be quiet. Hush him. We don't want to hear what you have to say. I'm going to ask you in just a moment whether you think he was a Sadducee or a Pharisee. So think about that while we talk about this a little bit. Ananias did not want to hear what Paul had to say. Okay? And then in 3, he says, then Paul said to him, God will strike you. Boy, this is foretelling. I'm telling you what God is going to do to you. God will strike you. You whitewashed, and this is my kind of one of my favorite little points. You whitewashed wall. Does anybody know what a whitewashed wall might be?
That's what I was going to ask.
Anybody have any ideas? Okay, I'll do it. I don't mind. So a whitewashed wall is something that looks valuable on the outside and is empty and worthless on the inside. He just told the high priest that he looked good, but he wasn't good. And it's because he is judging him according to the law. He says, you sit to judge me according to the law. And do you command me to be struck contrary to the law? He says, and now you're telling people to shut me up, which is against the law. Look here, this man knew the law inside and out. He is telling the high priest the law. It's like standing in front of the judge and citing cases in front of him that the judge is like, hold on, I have to read this in a book. How are you doing this by memory? That's how well Paul knew the law, that he could look at this high priest and say, no. Let me tell you, before you tell me to be quiet, here's what the law says. Paul was a bad man. I'm just telling you, he was a bad man. Okay, let me get my thing back on here. All right. And so now we jump to 4 and 5, and he says, and those who stood by said, do you revile God's high priest? So then the people around look at Paul and say, are you crazy? Are you trying to say the high priest doesn't know what he's talking about? And then in 5, Paul said, I did not know, brethren, that he was the high priest. For it is written, you shall not speak evil of a ruler of your people. Boy, this is a hard one. I got to tell you, this was a bitter pill for me, okay? One of the things, there's this concept of reverence, of position over person. And that's what is being got at here by Paul. Paul says, look, I didn't know he was the high priest. Now let's explore that for a moment. Why do you think Paul didn't know he was the high priest? What are your thoughts? Nobody's going to give me thoughts. Nobody?
Repeat the question, please.
My question was, why do you think that Paul didn't recognize Ananias as the high priest?
Because he was breaking the laws. He broke out his players represented.
Please go ahead, Wasika. You are so on it.
I'm just reading it. So it didn't like it. Just said he was. Let me see. I'm trying to see this. Paul didn't recognize as the high priest probably because Ananias' command broke the laws he was pledged to represent.
Ooh, see, the Bible that you have, Wasika, is good. And I'm not saying the rest of your Bibles are bad.
We got
but
the
what I
same
am
one,
going
I
to say,
think. You got NIV too, don't you?
I do, but
Okay.
different interpretations have different reasons for this this subject.
Okay.
For instance, some of the Bibles will reflect on the fact that they thought Paul had very poor eyesight, and that he physically could not see him. Okay?
Right.
And some of the Bibles will say that he had been gone a long time, and so he didn't recognize him as a ruler, right? Because he hadn't seen him in 30 years, or however long it had been, okay? And then there's what you just got to, Watsika, which was Paul being Paul. And Paul saying, well, he can't be a high priest if he doesn't know the law, right? And so this is, and again, this is the world according to James. You read yours and interpret it the way you need to. But from my perspective, this is Paul looking and saying, he doesn't act like, he's not behaving like a high priest. So I know better than to speak against the high priest. He just doesn't look like one to me. I laugh because we've had this issue in our country forever. When somebody who is in a particular party that is different than ours takes an office, right? We have a different perspective of the office based on the person.
Right, that's
right?
true.
And I'm trying to be careful here because my wife, if she was in the room, she would be ready to slap me on the back of the head and say, don't go into politics. And so I'm not going to go into politics. But what I am going to say is that when people take an office, for instance, a president, that office by itself carries some weight. It is a prestigious office. And as an office, should be respected. What Paul is saying is that the person who holds the office must also do things that are in line with the office. So there are facets to what is required to be in an office. You don't just, in our country, we elect you. Right? We just, all of us get together and we do a popularity contest about who we're going to vote for. Most of us don't have a clue about the human beings that we vote for. We don't know what they like to eat. We don't know where they like to go hang out. We don't know how they feel about certain things. We don't know, we don't know anything about it. We basically see them. The media puts out there, here's a list of people, and they tell us what they think they believe in, right? Which never matches up when you ask the questions of them directly. Their answer doesn't match up with what it is that they say they're going to do when they get in the office, right? It never matches. And then we pick. And what Paul is saying to us is that there is responsibility on both sides, that those who get elected the office itself carries prestige and responsibility and weight, and the person who gets elected to the office must also be representative of that office. Boy, that's a mouthful, right? Because some of those offices include things like being the boss, right? The person who works at the office who everybody reports to. There are some requirements of the position that they hold, right? And they must live up to those, even if they're struggling from a humanistic perspective to do those things. There's a requirement because they go hand in hand. And Paul is saying, Ananias hasn't met that yet. Go, Paul.
James,
Yes.
that seemed like is this correct me if I'm wrong, like the everyday life now, like you said, when Paul spoke out against Ananias or whatever, and they like, how dare him or whatever, do he know who he is? It's like they ready to strike him down, but it's like today, like people saying stuff against people now and losing their jobs and all that, you know, because you just can't say nothing about people now in certain positions and stuff, you know. Is that kind of similar?
It seems extremely similar to me.
Okay.
And I think there's some, you know, some of what we've got to be really careful with,
right,
is that we have to remember that they have to have, there's some requirements of the individual as well, right? So the position grants them this certain stuff, but they got to do some stuff too. They can't operate outside of what the intent of the position is, right? Of the authority that it gives them.
Oh, okay. So way off.
Yep.
Far-fetched. I was far-fetched. No, I was just saying what I was saying. I was way off.
No, you were spot on.
Okay.
It's exactly what's happening today. But the extremes can go either way, right?
Okay.
The extreme could be you can't say anything, so Paul would be persecuted for saying something against the ruler, or you can't say anything against the people, or the ruler will get in trouble. And there's a balance that has to take place, right? That is, you're spot on.
I think where, not to belabor the point, but I think where it gets iffy for us, Watsika, is we have freedom of speech per the Constitution, right? So while we should hold certain things in high regard, because we have freedom of speech, we can say technically whatever we like. It's just a matter of what we choose to put respect on. And when we feel that that freedom of speech is required to institute a change.
And look, let me be totally transparent, Watsika. Totally transparent. More transparent than I probably ought to be. I have struggled when I have sat and listened to prominent people, specifically pastors, who speak nothing against the immorality of the things that I see happening from political positions. I have struggled with it. And this puts me in my place, right? Because what it says is the position is still to be reverenced, right? Even if a not so bright, and I'm being kind here, not so bright, non-real human is occupying the position. But it also says, it doesn't say that I have to just not say that I have a problem with that individual. It just says that office has some respect that is required. Okay. So I can say that I don't particularly care for this individual as a human being, but I still have to be very respectful of the position of in this case, president, right? It's a real delicate balance, real delicate. But let's go to 6. I don't want to, because I'll get in trouble. 6. But when Paul perceived that one part were Sadducees and the other Pharisees, he cried out in the council, "Men and brethren, I am a Pharisee, the son of a Pharisee. Concerning the hope and resurrection of the dead, I am being judged." He went there on them quickly. So one of the things I learned about Paul was that Paul was extremely analytical and reflective. Okay? He analyzed his situation and he reflected on who he was and what he needed to do to accomplish those things that he wanted to get done, or that he was told had to be done. And so here Paul is sitting in front of this court. And it says when he realized that part of the court were Sadducees and part of the court were Pharisees, he said, wait a minute, hold on. I need y'all to know I'm a Pharisee, son of a Pharisee. And I need you to know that you are judging me concerning the hope and the resurrection of the dead. My belief in that. You're condemning me because I have hope in the resurrection of the dead. Anybody have any ideas why that's important?
One thing I think what Paul was saying, you know, that there's some of you that believe the same way I do, you know. So there's some connection here. So I want to connect to you all who believe how I do, kind of come on my side.
Ooh. Chris, I don't know if you know this show. One of you guys may know this show, but there's this show about this guy. His job is to figure out what jurors are thinking. I can't remember the name of the show, Christy. Bull. That's the name of it. The guy's name is Bull. And his job is to create a fake jury that looks just like the jury that has been selected for a trial and figure out how they would think. Paul is a master at this already. He looks at his jury and says, oh, wait a minute, I got to make some changes. And Jacqueline, to your point, he figures out, wait a minute, some of y'all think just like I do. You're a Pharisee. Half of you are just like me, right? So what's the difference between the Sadducees and the Pharisees?
Sadducees don't believe in the resurrection.
And the Pharisees do.
Yes.
And the Pharisees do.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. The Sadducees and the Pharisees reject all aspects of the supernatural. So angels, miracles, and the resurrection, right? They are what I would call legalistic in their belief. And they don't believe in those things that don't have material status, right? That don't, that they can't touch and feel. Look, we still got them. Let's be real. We have Sadducees and Pharisees in our church today. There are some people who won't believe in all parts of it. Now, right? There's some people who don't believe in speaking in tongues, right? There's some people who don't believe in angels. Some people call them ghosts sometimes, right? We don't know enough. There's some people who don't believe in miracles. They think that the human body just heals by itself or they don't believe in that. But they believe in God. They say, they have a belief in God. And they're Sadducees. We don't call them that anymore. And we've got some Pharisees. Now, I count myself a Pharisee because I believe in all those. Although I get a little nervous if like last night when Krista and I were watching a movie and ghosts start showing up in the movie, I ready to turn the thing off. It makes me uncomfortable. Right? It makes me uncomfortable because I know it's real and it could show up at any moment. But just saying, right? I count myself as a Pharisee, and I don't, I'm not here to say that one is better than the other. That's certainly different, and they have different beliefs. I don't think what we can do is split faith on these things, right? What we typically will do is use these two things to divide us and say that they make us so different that we can't cohabitate. And so I think we got to be really, really careful with this, because the reality is that Jesus died, that he was erased. Now the resurrection piece of it is a problem for me, for the Sadducees, right? Because you have to know that he was raised for you in order to be saved. So for me, that's the turning point for the Sadducees, okay? Now let's take this a step further, because I gotta move. All right, in 7, verses 7 through 9, it says, and when he had said this, a dissension arose between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the assembly was divided, just what he was looking for. For the Sadducees say there is no resurrection and no angel or spirit, but the Pharisees confess both. Then there arose a loud outcry, and the scribes of the Pharisees, I want you to hear who did it, and the scribes of the Pharisees party arose and protested, saying, we find no evil in this man, but if a spirit or an angel has spoken to him, let us not fight against God. So what is the scribe of the Pharisees? Anybody have any ideas? What is a scribe of the Pharisees? Take a shot. Don't be shy. Safe place. The words that are there tell you everything you need to know.
I think it's the person who captures everything. I mean, that's what a scribe is. They're the one who writes it all down. Basically, they keep a record.
What kind of record?
Of the law?
Norman, I saw you come unmuted.
I was just saying the New Living refers to them as teachers of religious law.
You got more, Jacqueline?
So I think knowledge of like the law and legalities and things like that, that's kind of what I'm thinking.
So here's what's cool about a scribe. Anybody here ever gone into a court room? Have you ever seen a courtroom? Have you ever heard of a stenographer?
Oh,
Yes.
yeah.
What do?
They take a record of everything they said.
Right.
Ooh.
Document.
Do they interpret it?
Well, they have to. I mean, they don't do it right then, but then when they finish, I guess they got to be able to interpret it because they wrote it down.
I don't think their job is to interpret it, though. Their job is to strictly capture exactly what was said.
Right.
Yeah, Eric and I have one in home that we go back for arguments.
What'd you say?
Say again, Norman.
So Eric and I have one at home that we use for arguments to speak.
Oh.
And what is it? How does it work?
She'll say one thing, I say, she said another, and then we go to the stenographer to see what was actually written down.
Oh,
okay.
So I want you to hear me. A stenographer's job in the courtroom is merely to write down every word or sound that was uttered in the courtroom.
Right.
Okay?
Interesting. Or sound too, huh?
Oh yeah, come on. Now we coming somewhere. Or sound that happens in the courtroom. And capture it in a timely fashion, meaning it follows exactly the timeline of the act. Okay.
So James, excuse me. So James, if you said it pick up the sounds, so they can't type, they ain't typing the sound. Does the stenographer, the machine actually pick the sound for them? Because how you gonna, yeah, okay, go ahead. Never mind, let me leave it alone because I'd go deep with this. But go
Oh,
ahead.
no, you're right on it because you're right what I'm talking about. This is part of the reason we have some trouble with interpretation of our Bible,
Okay.
right?
Mm.
Because they do. If somebody makes a growling noise in the audience, they got to put GRRL. They have a notation for things that can happen in the courtroom.
Okay.
And they have to capture it so that when the two sides come back together, or when they separate and they go back and listen to what was said or read what was said, it matches exactly what happened in the courtroom. So if 100 years from now, somebody picks up the tapes from this, it reads exactly like it happened in the courtroom.
Okay.
A scribe, that was their function. Okay? It doesn't, but because they write it all down, they know everything because they're the writers of it. They created it. It's like when I write something, if I write it, I'm going to know it forever. It's just the way I am. And so here you notice that the scribe says, and he says, and the scribes of the Pharisees. So he was one of the Pharisees who was writing down the stuff and protested this whole process, saying, we don't find anything evil about what this man is saying. Oh man, Paul has done it again. Okay, Paul has now, because remember, in order to be found guilty, you got to have a significant number. I think it was 2/3 of that court to agree. We got 50% right now saying no. Right? Here goes. And then in 10, he says, now when there arose a great dissension, the commander, fearing lest Paul might be pulled to pieces by them, commanded the soldiers to go down and take him by force from among them and bring him to the barracks. Now, whoa, who is the commander? Who do you think the commander is? Who does he represent? Rome.
Yeah, I was going to say Rome.
He is Rome. So remember, we've been having the Sanhedrin court have a dispute about Paul. And now the Roman government is jumping in and saying, wait, if we don't stop this, this man's going to get killed. He's not even getting a hearing. We got to stop all this because we're the ones who make all those decisions. So they grabbed him and they took him back to his barracks. And it says, but the following night, this is 11, but the following night, the Lord stood by him and said, be of good cheer, Paul, for as you have testified for me in Jerusalem, so you must also bear witness at Rome. This is important. This is important. I got to go through it really quickly, but this is important. But after he had been taken by the Roman soldiers, God comes to him. It's in red because this is what God said. Be of good cheer, Paul. Talking directly to Paul. Right? Because you've testified in Jerusalem for me. You went to this place that I told you to go to in your prayers. I answered them and told you to go to Jerusalem when nobody else would listen to me. You went to Jerusalem anyway. I also told you at the time you would go to Rome, but nobody believed you would ever live through Jerusalem, let alone Rome. He says, but just like I told you, you had to testify in Jerusalem. And just as you already have done that, you got to do the same thing in Rome. Your end is not here, Paul. It's not over, Paul. And if you really want to go take a moment and look at these are the scriptures, and I'm going to challenge you to go get these scriptures and go look at God and Paul, or Paul being instructed by God that he would be going to both Jerusalem and Rome. See, earlier I asked you about the fight that they were having about him going to Jerusalem and why did he go to Jerusalem? And you guys all told me God said, that he was with God and he was covered. And I'm here to tell you that God may, just like he did with Paul, send you into some vile, violent, destructive places. And you're going to say to yourself, hold on, self, whoa. Self-preservation says, whoa, this is not the place I'm supposed to be. But I know God told me I'm supposed to be here, but I don't want to be here. But God said I'm supposed to be here. But I don't want to, my eyes, my ears, my mind says, this does not look right. Right? And yet you got to go. Or do you? We'll answer that here in just a moment too. But these are the scriptures where Paul has this conversation. And then we jump to the heart of this thing. It says in 23:12-15, it says, and when it was day, some of the Jews banded together and bound themselves under an oath. Now I want you to know these are Jews. What is Paul? Is Paul a Gentile or a Jew?
Paul's a Roman.
Come on, Christy. What do you mean Roman?
He's a Roman. He's a Roman, and he claims, calls himself a Pharisee.
Come on. And it says, and when it was day, some of the Jews banded together and bound themselves under an oath, saying that they would neither eat nor drink till they had killed Paul.
They killed him.
Still hungry, I believe, and still, anyway. And so now there were more than 40 who had formed this conspiracy. So a group of more than 40 had said they were going to kill Paul. In 14, they came to the chief priest. I want you to see the totality of the conspiracy against Paul. It says they came to the chief priest and elders and said, we have bound ourselves under a great oath that we will eat nothing until we have killed Paul. Now I want you to see what I'm getting at here. This conspiracy goes to the top. They let the court know, the Sanhedrin court know what their plans were. Okay? The chief priest of their sect, do you think they were Sadducees or Pharisees?
Sadducees.
Yes, ma'am. They were Sadducees. Had bound themselves. The political party had decided that they were going to kill this man or die. Okay? And then they say in 15, now you, therefore, together with the council, suggest to the commander that he be brought down to you tomorrow, as though you were going to make further inquiries concerning him. But we are ready to kill him before he comes near. He says, look, I need the court system, I need the judge to be impacted by you to inform them. I need you to get the judges, in this case, the law, to say you need some more time with him. And when you ask for that time, we're going to kill him. So everybody who they talked to was complicit in the attempted murder of Paul. Come on now. The whole court system is complicit in the attempted murder of Paul. Okay? Well, at this point, it's not attempted, right? It's the planned murder. They haven't attempted anything yet. It's the planned murder. Okay? And so here we sit now on the precipice of a murder. It's planned out. All the parties are in agreement. All right? And then this happens. This is actually a part of somebody else's for next week, but I'm gonna work this through the best I can without giving up too much. It says, so when Paul sister's son heard of their ambush, he went and entered the barracks and told Paul. Now let's stop there for a moment. What did we just learn about Paul?
He's a prisoner
Yep. What else?
and a Roman.
And there's a plan to kill him.
Yep. Good. What else?
He heard from God.
Yeah.
Tell him to be of good courage to know that he is going to be okay.
Amen. I want you to do me a favor. Just look in 16 and tell me what you just.
Did he got a sister?
Come on now.
He got a sister, and he's got a connection evidently with the son to come and to let him know that this is going to happen to him.
Come on. We are now learning some details, and this is the hard part about Paul, right? We have to find little details like this. Paul was not an only child.
Yeah, that's the first time I heard. Anything mentioned about a family member.
See? So we're going to play with that a little bit, and we'll get to that later on. But so when Paul's sister's son heard of their ambush, you also know that the son has some authority.
Yep.
Who can just enter into the prison?
That's right.
Come on. This people in high places that you don't even know. Right? So he entered into the barracks and told Paul, and then this is where it got real good to me. Then Paul called one of the centurions to him and said, "Take this young man to the commander, for he has something to tell them." Now, who controls the barracks? What group of people control the barracks? The prison.
The centurions.
Who are what?
Roman.
Yes. What group of people are after him?
The Sadducees.
Yes. For our purposes, we're going to have to say the whole court, because we now know if the son heard about it, the sister's son heard about it, it must have been out in the community at least a little bit, right? So everybody likely knew something about it, but we don't know that for sure. But we do know that the barracks are controlled by the Romans, okay? We do know that the court is trying to kill Paul. And so what does Paul do? Paul says, wait a minute, who's the only group of people who don't have a reason to kill me? Who do you think could care less whether Paul lived or died? The Romans. See, they had no tie to Paul. Paul meant nothing to them. They didn't follow him. They weren't concerned with the law of those people. They only were concerned about the Roman law. And so what Paul did was use something that was contrary to his belief system to create a space for him not to be killed tonight. So he has the young man go meet the commander who they took him to when they pulled him out of the fight between the Sadducees and the Pharisees. And so that sets up what comes next. Now, and I'm going to finish right here. My point in all of this today, you will find many points in here. My point in all of this is to say to you this. Don't run from the things God has told you to do. If he tells you to go into the fiery furnace, go into the fiery furnace. I didn't say don't be afraid. I didn't say that it was going to be easy. But don't associate all things that push and pull you with the devil. Because it's not.
True. That's right.
It's not all the devil. A lot of it has to do with our ability to learn our lessons when we get them the first time. Some people will learn this because we talked about it today. Some of you will only learn it when you go through it yourself. And so my point again in all of this is to open your mind, your ideas to the possibility that as you have choices about just how much you have to go through. It depends on how well your mind is able to work through what God is actually calling you to do. Are you able and ready, more importantly, ready to do what he asks you to do when he asks you to do it? Or do you need more molding? Right? Or do you need more pushing and pulling? Do you need more circumstances to draw it out of you? And so that's my thing that I would leave you with today, is just to think about that as you work through it. Not all things, in fact, no weapon formed against you shall prosper. But this isn't a weapon formed against you. This was a weapon formed for you. And you learning that lesson will depend entirely upon you. All right, I'm done. I'm 2 minutes over, Christy, even though I was 7 minutes late.
All right, everybody. Hey, just as an announcement, we will start Sunday schools or Discipleship Academy starting at 10 a.m. 10 a.m. now that we are back in the building starting next week. So you will see a text that comes out that says we're still starting at 10:30. That's not accurate. I just don't have administrative rights to be able to change it. I've already scheduled them. So just know, starting next week, we will go from 10 to 11 to accommodate allowing folks like us who live a little bit further away to be able to end and still get to church before we start. Okay.
That's great. That's great.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.